Welcome to the 50K Q&A. By the way, I just wanted to say thank you for all of the support. I'm trying to do something a little bit different. I'm keeping the channel completely ad-free. And if you wanted to show some support, I don't have a Patreon or anything, but you could grab a copy of my book, link in a pinned comment down below. So I'm going to be answering your top 20 most liked or upvoted questions from the community tab. And I'm going to be going in reverse order because I'm going to be building tension throughout the video. It's like a bench press. On the way down, you keep tight and under control. And then on the way up, you answer the questions. All right, so I'm fully in the caffeination station and ready to go. So question number 20. What is your opinion on the recent Junk Volume Explained video of Geoff Nippard? Do you think 6 sets per muscle group per workout is the most optimal sweet spot for hypertrophy? So I wouldn't say that there's really a sweet spot at all. And Geoff was pretty clear about this, that there's going to be some individual variation. It depends on the muscle group as well. So 6 sets for hamstrings per workout, that might even be overdoing it for a lot of people. Some people might even be lower. It might be 4 sets or something, right? Especially if it's a Romanian deadlift, it's a good morning, a stiff-legged deadlift, something where you're really getting a stretch on the hamstrings, especially if you're doing it well, you just can't tolerate that much work of that style of lifting. And he made it clear that this meta-analysis, this curve of the effective, or what is going to be junk volume or effective volume, it's just a suggestion. It's just a starting point. And I think Geoff does a really, really good job of keeping in mind that the study is just a starting point. It is an average of a lot of different people. And this average makes a lot of sense. But just because you're above that doesn't mean it's necessarily junk volume. I did a video on ultra high volume training, which I will link in a card above. For me, doing 6 sets in a single workout for back, that is under training. That's not junk volume if I go above that. That's what I need to grow, because I've done 6 sets to failure and not grown, and grown better from doing double that or even triple that. I've done 15 or 20 sets to failure for back in a single workout. So some areas and some people can just tolerate a little bit more. You have to experiment and see where you are on that curve. I do think it is a good general recommendation to probably be somewhere in the 5 to 10 sets in a muscle or in a workout per muscle group. Although again, you're going to have to experiment a little bit, and some people can do less or do more, and that is going to be best for them. Question number 2. The first one was a little bit silly. This one is a lot more serious. Would you rather have leg-sized fingers or finger-sized legs? So this is obviously pretty damn important. All right, so leg-sized fingers. So now I have fingers that are just, that's a lot of lean body mass. My FFMI is going to be tremendous. Might be hard to use a phone or fucking anything. So could I grab a barbell? I don't know. I couldn't grab dumbbells. I guess I could grab the whole thing. Man, this is a tough question. Or finger-sized legs. So now I'm walking around a little, that can't support my weight. Now I'm a paraplegic, I'm just crawling everywhere or something.
I'm paraplegic, I'm just crawling everywhere or something.
I'm paraplegic, I'm just crawling everywhere or something.
I'm gonna go for the first one. Like, it would make life very weird, and I get a lot of stares, but at least I'm jacked, right? Another very serious one. Would you rather be clean-shaved or fully bearded for the rest of your life? Clean shaved for sure. Okay, if you're clean shaved, like, you don't have to worry about it. It looks pretty normal. Fully bearded, I grow hair like up here and shit, and like fully bearded, I can't shave at all. Oh man, I'm gonna be Gandalf within a few months, and I can't shave at all. I mean, yeah, no thanks. I'd rather just be clean shaven. Question 17, sort of a lighthearted one. Would you ever consider hopping on a podcast with Greg Doucette? With all your history together, it would be nice to have a calm conversation between the two of you, if you don't mind. And 50,000 of his followers are grateful to you for all your free knowledge, etc. Blah, blah, blah. All right, yeah, no problem. No. He's reached out to a few people that I talk to on a regular basis. I won't name names. and they said that everything was going to be very strictly and tightly controlled, like what they could talk about and what topics they could go into or not go into. And it seems, looking at some of his interviews before, which I actually have enjoyed, I liked his stuff with Mike Israetel, Lane Norton, but it did look like it was significantly chopped up, and I would not want to be on his channel because with his editing history, I don't trust him or his editor to actually do things honestly. I've seen it many, many times, you know, with Alpha Destiny, with Sean Nalwani. They just take a clip, they take it out of context, and then they just chop it up. And, you know, with my review of his book, they made me look like the bad guy, even though I said I bought it to support him, and, you know, I had good stuff to say as well. So, you know, I don't really trust it to be an honest and open conversation, especially because a lot of the topics that I would want to go into, like testosterone is a supplement, right? Like, oh, your fat burner was mega underdosed. Like, bullying other YouTubers. Like, there's oh my god, there are dozens of topics that I would love to go into that he would not love to go into at all, and so I think it's better just to not do that. Plus, if I do it and then he does something dumb later, now I'm associated with him. Plus, I can't call him out on that kind of stuff later because then it looks two-faced, like, oh, you were on a podcast together and now you're calling him out. So I'd rather just be able to call him out on bullshit because he will do something again at some point. And it sucks because I used to be a fan of his, right? Like 2 years ago or so, or a year and a half, I used to really like his content. I used to support him. You know, I used to post videos very much in favor of his content and his brand, but now I just don't want to be associated with him, and I think he's done enough to make it clear that his motivations are mostly financial. All right, next question. Which one has higher muscles growth? Number 1, high sets, moderate intensity, 5 to 3 reps in reserve, or low sets, high intensity, 2 to 0 reps in reserve. So by high sets and low sets, I assume you mean volume rather than rep range, and you didn't really specify, like, what is high sets, what are low sets. I would say, yeah, again, it's tough to say without actually knowing the numbers, and it's difficult to actually predict in advance, and it is true that there's going to be some variability in what people actually respond best to. So some people, they don't find they get much from a very, very high proximity to failure, and they're better off holding back a little bit and doing more volume. There's going to be this continuum from effort per set and the number of sets that you do, and either extreme is not going to be useful. So if you're just doing one set every 2 weeks, and it's a damn hard set, I would not expect that to be very good for muscle growth. On the other side, if you're doing a ton of sets, and they're all 8, 10, 12 reps in reserve, none of those sets are really going to be particularly useful, and I would also expect that not to be great for muscle growth. So you want somewhere in the middle. I would typically recommend anywhere from 0 reps in reserve to maybe 3 or 4, depending on the exercise. You know, if it's squats, a set of 8 with your 12 rep max, that's still pretty tough, right? And so that is still very stimulatory. I would say isolations, you're better off going closer to failure. With compounds, you can maybe get more not as close to failure. You know, there's some EMG data saying that even with 70% of your 1 rep max on the squat, you're still getting maximal quad activation. And then from there up to 100%, other muscle groups are sort of kicking in. Same thing with the pecs, the chest, and the bench. So with compounds, you might not need to go as close to failure in order to fully stimulate the prime movers. I would say experiment. See which camp you fall into. And then even more than that, realize that there are not really 2 camps. It's a continuum, and often that middle range is going to be ideal. All right, next question. I've recently been taking 1 tablespoon of salt water half an hour before my workout. I've been informed it helps with a better pump, replenishes electrolytes, and it can help performance. Is this safe to do 4 to 5 days a week over time? Congrats on 50K. Oh, thank you. It depends on how concentrated it is. I would say it's probably fine. I mean, if it's a tablespoon of pure salt, I just looked this up. It's like 17 grams of salt, which is probably a bit much, you know. But if it's just salt water, I would say this is fine. I actually learned about this from Team 3DMJ. I think it was Eric Helms, where they take like a gram or 2. I want to say. Not 100% sure. I learned this a while ago. Before they go on stage. So before they go on stage, they take this to make them more vascular. And yeah, it can definitely work. And this should be safe. I think the negative effects of sodium are mostly overblown. And as long as you don't already have like hypertension issues, this should be fine. Next question, for progressive overload, people always state add a rep or weights. Does it mean to add a rep to every set or just one rep in just one of the sets? Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So if you can add a rep to every set, do that. If you can only add it to one set, do that. I have sort of not changed, but I guess updated my opinion on progressive overload, where it is the goal, yes, but it's also the result of the previous session, and you shouldn't necessarily have to force it. And this is where just train harder than last time, it kind of falls flat, because yeah, most people should be able to train harder and that would actually get them good results, but it should be something that just sort of naturally happens. You don't necessarily have to force it. So if you're doing 3 sets and you can add a rep to every set, great. If you can add 2 reps to every set, do that, right? Like, don't necessarily hold back, but if you can't add a rep to any set, that's also totally fine. Like last session I did 3x10 on squats. This session I did 3x10 on squats, and same weight, same reps, same sets. I didn't progressively overload. But does that mean the second session was not stimulating muscle growth? Of course it was, right? Because it's still certainly sufficiently hard. And progressive overload, it's more of a long-term thing. And just because you don't add weight or add reps from one session to another session to another session, that doesn't mean you're getting nothing out of it. It's the concept of feeder lifts. So you can have something in your program that doesn't actually progress, mind blown, I know, and you're still getting value from it. It's supporting another lift, or you're progressing in some other way, whether it's like a better tempo or a better, mind-muscle connection. It's not the best thing to do for all of your training, but it can be a small part of your training. All right, next question. How do you know you've reached your genetic ceiling? How long does it take to get there? And what do you have to do to maintain that muscle? So sort of a 3-parter here. How do you know you've reached your genetic ceiling? You don't. Point blank, you don't. You could say that you're close. Like, let's say you've trained for 12 to 15 years, and no matter what you do, no matter, how you manipulate your volume, your intensity, your frequency, exercise selection, you've tried everything. There are no stones left unturned. You are not gaining any muscle, and you flatlined. In that case, okay, maybe you could say, I'm close to my ceiling. But are you really at your ceiling? There's a lot of stuff that people don't actually do, where they could be gaining muscle, but they just don't, right? Like perhaps they could have done more volume and eked more gains out of that. Maybe an extra hour of sleep or 2 per night. That can actually help quite a bit. Optimizing hormone levels. In the short term, very, very small impact. In the long term, probably a noticeable impact over a long period of time when you're already at that threshold or close to your ceiling. Now, is there a limit? I mean, you're going to see slowing gains, especially like towards a decade and past a decade. But is there really a ceiling? Maybe not necessarily. Like, have you maxed out your hip flexor muscularity? Probably fucking not. Squats don't work them really. Hinging variations don't work them. Almost no one works the anterior chain in that way. And if you look at the psoas muscle, the TFL muscle of sprinters who actually do use hip flexion, they're fucking huge. You look at it like an MRI or something, compared to a normal person, tremendous development, not just in the glutes, in the posterior chain, but in the anterior chain, because it's actually used a tremendous amount. Almost no one trains that muscle, right? Those muscles of the hip flexors. And they're actually surprisingly big, or at least potentially big. Your anterior tibialis, that's another one. Almost no one trains the front of the shin. Is it going to be as big as the calves? No. But there's probably a few, a couple hundred grams there that people just aren't really developing, because who the hell loads toe raises, right? Like, knees over toes guy has been good about, emphasizing these areas that no one else really talks about. but most people do not train these areas, right? Adductors, I think a lot of people have lagging, like some parts of the back just aren't trained all that effectively. Rear delts often lagging. Forearms, right? Like a lot of people don't bother with forearms. And so there's a lot of areas that you could bring up if you chose, if you really wanted to, but a lot of people don't. Now, as for how long does it take to get there? Yeah, about 10 years. People seem to think like you hit a limit after 5 years. I looked way different at the 5-year mark compared to now, like the 7.5 year mark. Okay, so you can certainly still make progress past 5 years. Some of these channels where it's like, yeah, you build almost all your muscle in the first 3 years. I mean, you build a lot of it, you build the majority of it, but like not the overwhelming majority. You can still absolutely make progress past year 3, past year 5, and then even probably past year 10, you can make noticeable gains. They're going to be slow for sure, but especially if you're lean, they should be noticeable. And as for maintaining it, you don't have to do nearly as much to maintain compared to gain. So I think the literature is roughly like a sixth or maybe as low as a ninth of the volume that it took to build it to maintaining it. So maintaining is something that is very, very easy. And even if you do lose muscle, which doesn't happen very quickly and doesn't take much to actually just maintain, even if you do lose muscle, you can gain it back very, very quickly just because you have that myonuclear domain, and regaining is extremely easy and might even potentiate future gains. So I'm happy to take a week or two off a couple of times a year just because I know that long-term progress is not impacted at all and might even be benefited. All right, next question. If you had to generalize, I don't like generalizing, what do you think the best training split is for beginners, intermediate, and advanced for each? What would that training plan look like? All right, so I write custom plans for a living, and it's hard to just put something out that's super general. I mean, I could, and I have, and there are templates in my book, but I don't generally like to generalize, let's put it that way. First of all, advanced, there's no general advanced plan, okay? If you're advanced, the only way you're going to get to be advanced is if you know what is going to work for you, right? No one gets advanced by following cookie cutter plans, okay? It has to be customized, and preferably customized by you or working with a coach where you're also involved in the process. Intermediate, I would say push-pull legs is good. Again, just hitting up the basic movements, hinges, squats, pushes, pulls, rows, presses, a little bit of isolation. Again, my book goes into this in a lot of detail, and I have a lot of videos on this, so I'm not going to break down an entire sets and reps kind of thing. So push-pull legs is good, upper-lower is good. You could do full body 3 times a week, even as an intermediate. Heck, even if you're advanced, full body is viable. You just might need more than 3 days per week. But not necessarily. You can perhaps make gains as an advanced athlete only doing 3 times per week. It is possible. As for beginners, the full body 3 times per week works really well, but just because they might not have the work capacity and the recovery capacity to be in there 6 times per week. I mean, you can, but I would say if you're just getting into fitness, dip your toe in the water, right? You don't have to just go from 0 days per week to 6 days per week or 7 days per week or even just 5 days per week. I would say 3 or 4 days per week is going to be ideal, either upper lower or full body 3 times per week. Those are both really, really good options. Next question, how to track progress in pull-ups or chin-ups when bulking. The weight gain will make up for the added poundage, making it harder to track progress, versus when cutting, when you're lighter, therefore you should do more reps, but how much of it is real progress? Yeah, so this is, you could just track the absolute load, so you weigh yourself on the day, and then you also the added weight, and then, that's your weight that you're actually lifting. For example, Alpha Destiny's lat recommendation, I think, is 315 pounds total for the weighted pull-up, which I'm just about at. I'm not strong at pull-ups, but I'm relatively heavy. And you will notice that progress on pull-ups, as well as dips to a lesser extent, are better when you're cutting compared to other movements. So your bench might be stalling when you're cutting because your leverages are changing, because there's less padding around the joints, less fat on your back, on your chest equals more range of motion and just worse leverages. So it's rare for your bench to maintain during a cut. But you might find that your dips are actually going up because you're moving less weight and it doesn't actually impact the range of motion quite as much. So you could do that. You could just track the total weight. I don't even bother doing that. I just track the weight that is added, and then I realize, progress might not be as fast when I'm bulking up. And, if you maintain your reps when you're bulking on pull-ups, you're getting stronger. Like, you're building muscle, most likely. That's still a way of progressive overloading, even if the weight hanging around your junk is exactly the same. And then when you're cutting, you'll probably find that this, at a minimum, maintains and probably improves, again, just because you're actually moving less body weight, and therefore you can make up for that by adding external load. Next question, most of my hypertrophic gains have been made by doing calisthenics multiple times per day, pull-ups, push-ups, etc., versus going to the gym 4 to 5 times per week. Why did I see better results on the former? Did the sheer accumulation of volume due to the very high frequency did its job? Or maybe I wasn't training hard enough in the gym. So this is actually certainly unusual. Have I heard this before? I haven't heard this before, actually. Usually calisthenics is inferior to weight training for muscle growth. It's certainly viable, and you can certainly develop an impressive physique, but are you going to maximize your overall muscularity and size with calisthenics? Probably not, especially for lower body. Again, it's very, very good, and if you like training that way, you can certainly develop an impressive physique, and clearly it's worked for you. But I would say it's not optimal, and I would question what you're doing in the gym, just because on paper, and just from what I've seen anecdotally talking to a lot of people, weight training should be better than calisthenics. So I would say, yeah, whatever you were doing was probably not quite optimal. And it might be a volume thing, it might be a frequency thing, but I would say if you're going 4 to 5 times per week and hitting everything twice per week, it should be enough frequency and enough volume to certainly hypertrophy. So yeah, something was probably off in your training plan. Next question, what is the best solution for a late intermediate lifter who can only work out for 3, possibly but not consistently 4 days per week? So I would say plan for what you might do, but don't always plan it in. So don't do upper, lower, because then you're missing that 4th day some of the time. So you might want to do 3 full body workouts, and then you can chuck in an optional 4th one for your weaker muscle groups or something that recovers a little bit faster. So perhaps like full body Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then Saturday, if you can go, you have like a bro workout, arm and shoulders, or maybe it's something where it's a little bit more isolation, that type of thing. But I wouldn't program for 4 days per week when you think you can only make 3 a lot of the time. That just doesn't make sense. Alternatively, you can do upper, lower. And if you make 3 days, but not the 4th, you just roll the 4th day into the next week and you keep going that way. So you're not necessarily having a 7-day week. You're just alternating upper and lower and going when you can. All right, next question. Would you agree full body 5 to 6 days per week is the most superior split for almost everyone? It, in theory, should allow to maximize gains. It allows most customization and the most amount of recoverable volume at the appropriate intensities while having... Sorry, I cut off your question. While having negligence junk volume. So I don't think the junk volume thing is all that much of a factor for most splits. It might be for a bro split, but on typical like push-pull legs, upper, lower, you're working more muscle groups in a single day, so I doubt you're working any one muscle group to the point where sets are not going to be effective or useful or stimulating adaptations. I am doing high-frequency full body right now. It's something I've done in the past. I think it is very, very effective. Is it going to be the best for everyone? Like, in theory, yeah. In practice, probably not. It's not going to be something that is going to be wildly better. I think that it makes sense. And if you go to the gym and basically you train whatever is fresh. But that might not always be completely full body. And there might be some kind of threshold that you need to hit in a single workout to actually, stimulate satellite cell proliferation and to make long-term gains. There's just not really enough research to say if there is or there isn't, but there might be actually a minimum threshold to actually break through a plateau. So there's no evidence for that. There's no evidence against that. It's just my theory. And so, perhaps there's actually a case in some ways for a bro split. Yeah, I know. Not something I'd recommend, but, in theory, you can defend almost any training split just through various mechanisms, right? So I would say go with the split that you enjoy and you can actually do consistently and you can make progress on, and I wouldn't really overthink the exact split because the exact split isn't the most important factor, and I think a lot of people put a specific training split on a pedestal. Next question, what is the meaning of life? Oh man. Oh god, oh man. I'm not good at this deep philosophical type of stuff. It's whatever you want it to be. Right? Like find something you enjoy doing and do it. There we go. It doesn't have to be, super complicated or complex or anything like that. Just find something you enjoy doing and do it. My meaning is not going to be the same as your meaning. And a lot of these philosophical gurus, they just project their own hopes and goals and dreams and desires and meanings onto their audience. And just find your meaning. Find something that drives you forward and you're interested in and good at and can actually impact the world, hopefully in a positive way. So, yeah, if you thought you were going to get something productive or useful from getting my answer on the meaning of life, you're wrong. Next question, very, very important one. If all the content creators in YouTube fitness had a last man standing gladiatorial battle, who would come out on top? Well, let's break this down. Blowho. The man has mercenary training. Do you know what that means? Mercenary training, as well as years of combat experience. So, in this imaginary world, he would definitely win. Alpha Destiny. If he can rack pull above the knee 1,000 pounds, he can probably rip a man's liver out, so don't count him out. Cali Muscle. 5 or 10 years ago, I would say he'd be a pretty strong contender. Prison background, a lot of muscle mass. But right now, I don't know if the heart is in quite the condition, is that bad to say, to really take the prize. Next, you have Thor and Eddie Hall. They would just go directly for each other, pitchfork, knives, cleavers, scimitars, whatever, and they would take each other out, right? Like if they ganged up on everyone else, strong case there, but it's like matter and antimatter, you can ignore them when they're together. Sean Nalawani. Now you've seen some of his edits, definitely not afraid to call out the bullshit. We might be looking at a low-key savage here, people. Nico Hearn, I feel like he would just run away because, the threat of anything impacting his facial features would just be too great. I mean, you don't get Botox and then mess up your face a few weeks later. Derek from moreplatesmoredates.com. Have you seen the man on those delts? Pretty impressive. I feel like he would probably just sponsor some other athletes and brew up some special concoction or nootropic to get them to fuck everyone else up. Probably. Vegan gains? Try to be objective here. I don't really like the guy, but I feel like he'd be dangerous. He has that unhinged mentality that he can just tap into his central nervous system fully, and yeah, he'd be dangerous. Stay away. Jeff Cavalier? Nah. I mean, he'd talk a big game, though, and he'd certainly post his incredible training sessions before the meet. Lyle McDonald? I don't know, man. Anyone who can hold on to mild disagreements and transgressions for as long as he can, watch out. Fillion? Nah. Revival Fitness, I think there's a strong case here for him getting pretty far. He's been dealing with a lot of homeless guys in LA. That's got to be worth some experience points. Bald Omni-Man, I feel like he's the kind of guy who has a shitload of combat training, but just doesn't talk about it or reveal it until it's far, far too late. Jeremy Etienne. I'm just kidding. Alan Thrall. Pretty strong case here. He's ex-military. Could wrap the beard around a lot of throats and just throttle them that way. Strong dude. He's in shape. He's a strong man. End of story. Chris Duffin. Now, if you don't know Chris Duffin's backstory, you probably just discount him. But if you do, you know he is a very strong contender to take this crown. Shredded Sports Science dude. I like his content. Gonna have to go with no. He'd do even worse than me, which is saying something. Brian Alsruhi. I think that's how you pronounce it. I always forget how to pronounce his name. He knows his way around the forest. Very strong guy. I feel like he knows a few dirty tricks as well. He'd be dangerous. Johnny Candido, not the biggest guy out there. Pretty strong. But have you seen the look in his eyes sometimes? Sometimes he just gets this glint in his eyes. And the fact that he leaves that in the video is fucking terrifying. Imagine what he's like on a day-to-day basis. And then imagine what he's like in a gladiatorial combat arena. Oh my god, it literally just gives me shivers. Rugenhagen. Holy shit. This is like the shit he does on camera for fun. And then imagine him actually fighting for his life. Oh. Dennis Arnold, Freaky D. Strong dude. Big dude. Conditioned. And graceful as fuck. Watch out. Greg Doucette. Nope. I'd make sure to get the job done. I missed his name on the paper. Dr. Mike Israetel. Strong as hell. Full range of motion. And he's got a little bit of the Candido craziness in him. And probably a little bit more because of the Russian side of things. Plus, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Yeah. Not dead yet. Eli. Well, he's one of the few that actually is a combat athlete here first. And then, a lifter second. And he might not be the biggest guy, but don't discount actual combat training. Right? Like, all these bodybuilders, yeah, they have, muscles. But, training actually counts for a lot more. Natural hypertrophy, similar to Alpha Destiny, I just don't see him not walking out of the arena alive. I think he would just do what it takes, point blank, to survive. Next up, FitLab. FitLab would be commentating, of course, so he would sort of survive through that way of things, not actually participating, but he would just be commentating on what was going on. Geoff Nippard, well, I think he would certainly have the most scientifically sound strategy, and probably the most scientifically well-designed weaponry available. Certainly a contender. He probably has some futuristic shit that no one else is going to have. Riakrios Grizzly. This man has been training for the difficult, for this time, for a long time. Possibly for all time. So, it's hard to argue against him. He's got the size, he's got the strength. Does he have the mobility and the heart condition to survive? I don't know. But certainly a very strong contender. I don't know who would actually win. It would be interesting to try to make this happen, someone. PewDiePie, come on. Use your sweet YouTube cash to make this happen. I think we can all agree, though, that Dr. Eric Berg would be the first to go. All right, next question. How much of a difference does weightlifting and bodybuilding, I assume you mean just general weightlifting, not actually like the sport of weightlifting in the Olympics, make in maintaining your body while you age? How much muscle can you actually maintain when you don't stop to work out? I assume you mean to do stop or to don't do working out. So to answer the first question, yeah, it can make a tremendous difference, and muscle mass is going to be a good thing. I think sometimes people see professional bodybuilding and they just think that, oh, lifting weights is unhealthy, or look at these guys who are dying very young, etc. That's not, I mean, that is the drugs. That is not the lifting, okay? Let's all be clear. And lifting weights is very, very healthy. And generally speaking, having more muscle mass is going to be good for your quality of life as well as your longevity. Now, if you are 25, 26 FFMI, you're natural, but you're a very, very big dude, is your longevity going to be as good as if you were lighter? Possibly not. You know, you don't see that many centenarians who are over 200 pounds, for example. And so it sort of depends on what you want. Do you want longevity or do you want muscle? There might be a slight trade-off there. But I would say for most people, there's nothing to be worried about when it comes to lifting weights. As for how much muscle you might maintain when you completely stop working out, you'll maintain a little bit most likely. For example, if I just completely stopped lifting weights for like 5 years, I would lose the vast majority of my muscle, right? Like if I just started running again and you know, doing marathons and shit like that, I would look vastly different and I probably wouldn't even look like I lifted. But I would probably still be bigger than if I had never ever lifted at all. How much would that be? I don't know. It might be like 5 or 10 pounds over what I would be if I had never lifted weights, but I'm not sure if there's any studies on how much you lose in the very, very long term. All right, next question. During failure sets on most compound-ish movements, I find myself resting between reps for up to maybe 10 seconds in order to prepare for the next rep. For example, on a leg sled press, I may rest with the legs extended. Is this okay, or am I training inefficiently by intentionally minimizing tension for the time being? So I would say there's sort of a fine line between resting in a set and it being just a new set. And it also makes it a little bit more difficult to track. So if you're doing squats or leg press or maybe bench press and you're just resting at the top in order to get more reps, is that failure or is that beyond failure? Because a lot of people do that to avoid failure. So you see them do squats and they're resting between reps and they just keep going and going and going and going, but none of the reps are even that hard. And so they're not actually even close to failure. They might stop when they're 5 reps in reserve, rest a little bit, do a couple more, but they're still not really close to failure. And I would say in this case, you're probably getting less out of the set than if you had just done the reps continuously. On the other hand, some people actually genuinely get very close to failure, 0 to 1 reps in reserve, then they rest, they keep going. All of these reps are very hard, they're slowing down, they are sufficiently grindy to be slow enough to actually be stimulating adaptations, and so this is more beyond failure. So rest pause can make a set avoid failure or be beyond failure, or somewhere in the middle, and so it really just does depend on the execution. And in general, I don't think there's anything you can do with rest pause that you can't do with normal training. It's maybe more time efficient, but I would say that's the main benefit. And there's nothing wrong with it, but honestly assess where you are in proximity to failure. Because if you're avoiding failure with this kind of high intensity technique, it's not really a high intensity technique. It's a low intensity technique. Next question, how much joint pain is normal when lifting weights? Should we push through slight discomfort, for example, elbow pain, 3 out of 10 during bench? Or is it better to avoid pain, even if it means to not bench? So this is where you should know yourself, and if you're a coach, you should know your client. There are some people who are just a little bit more sensitive to pain. And, you know, if something, it hurts, it might not be a problem, right? It's just that they are very aware of very, very minor sensations, and they become bigger in their mind than it actually is in reality. And so if you're that type and you experience 3 out of 10 on a lot of different movements and they never really get worse and there's never really any long-term issues, I would say, yeah, you can ignore it, right? Like if I had a client and they say, oh, I've been getting a little bit of knee pain on squats, I dig deeper. I say, okay, well, Has it always been this way, right? Is this something that is normal? And if they say, oh yeah, I've been getting it for like 10 years and it never really gets worse and it's always just sort of there and it's not that bad and I can still perform well and it's maybe only when I'm warming up, you know, in that case, I'm like, all right, well, you know, doesn't seem to be an issue. But if it's been getting worse and, you know, they take a long time to warm up and it's a higher, percentage, it's maybe a 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10, and it's impacting their workouts and it's getting worse during the session. If something is getting worse during the session, watch out. If it gets better during the session, probably not that big a deal. You can also listen to your body at other times. Like if you wake up and your shoulder is throbbing or something, like maybe it's something to pay attention to, right? But if it's just like it hurts once on one rep and it never hurts again, probably not that big a deal. So I would say in general, like assess how much pain you get, when do you get it, does it go away, is it getting worse, is it long term, where is it? Like if I get a pain, like a random pain in my elbow that I've never ever gotten before, you know, I listen to it and I'm like, okay, well, you know, let's do another set, do it lighter, like feel it out, and I might never get it again, and I might just like forget about it if it's not that big a deal. But there's other areas that I know that I have to be much more mindful about. You know, if I'm getting, let's say, hip pain when I'm squatting, and it's like it hurts when I'm warming up, and then it's getting worse, like, you know, you might have to make a call to not do that movement on that day. And some movements I just don't do at all because they're just not worth it. Next question, number 2, your opinion on 10 to 20 effective sets a week per muscle group on a 4-day split. Is it even possible without neglecting other muscle groups in the process? Congrats on a 50K, by the way. Thank you. It's certainly doable, especially on the lower side of that. Don't have everything be 20 sets per muscle group per week, okay? That just, even if you're advanced, you probably don't need to do that. I rarely go more than about 12 or 13 sets for my hinging, you know, posterior chain work. Focus on compound movements. Realize there's a lot of overlap between muscle groups, right? And you might not need to do as many sets for biceps if you're doing a lot of pulling and rowing movements, because those are going to target that area very, very effectively. In general, I like the mentality of doing as little as possible to get gains rather than doing as much possible while still being able to recover. There's going to be a wide continuum in between those, between doing as little as possible and doing as much as possible. But I would err on the side of getting more from less rather than getting less from more. Last question, the most liked upvoted question. How does China compare to the USA in the social cultural differences? Also, congrats on 50K, 100K, here we come. Thank you, dude. So there are a lot of differences. This is something I ask quite a bit, or just about my life in China, or like, why do you live in China, or why did you move to China, that kind of stuff. So the biggest difference I would say is a lot of Americans really embrace, you know, personal freedoms and individuality and freedom of speech and just freedoms in general, which, you know, I grew up in America, I'm an American, and so obviously I still resonate with that a lot. But, you know, living in China has also shaped my opinions. And, you know, there is, in some ways, less freedom, but in other ways, more. I remember my first year, the first month that I was in China, we went to Beijing for, like, teacher training or whatever. And in America, you can't, like, drink in public. At least in Connecticut, where I lived, like, you couldn't drink outside in public. Like, it wasn't a thing. It was illegal, actually. They had, like, these blue laws or whatever, a remnant of, like, a religious law where you can't buy alcohol on Sundays and, like, you can't drink out in public. But in China, like, we were just drinking beers outside, and it was like, we're like, this is pretty fucking free. And, you know, no one was bothering us. And, you know, in some ways it's less free, in some ways it's more free. This also shows up in the political structure. There's someone at my door. Police. They already know. They've got this shit on lockdown. Literally. No, but it shows up in the political structures as well. Like, the average American thinks that everyone wants democracy. The whole world would be better, you know, in a democratic system, without sort of acknowledging that there are drawbacks to those systems. And the average Chinese person, they don't want a democracy. Especially if they see what is happening in the US, they're like, no, keep that shit away from me. We don't want that. Like, and if you explain the concept of voting to the average Chinese person, they're just like, oh, well, who cares? Like, I don't want that. And, you know, Americans, you know, we really do embrace the right to vote and to choose our own government or whatever. But, you know, that doesn't always mean that it's the best way forward. And a lot of Americans, like, they don't believe that. They will never, ever believe that. And they think that everyone wants democracy, etc. But that's definitely not the case. They also probably think, like, the average Chinese person is brainwashed or, like, you know, is controlled. Not really. Like, in some cases, yeah, I've certainly encountered people who are that way. But usually it's actually just them coming to their own conclusions. And if they support the government, they're doing that because they think they're actually doing a good job. And it's not because of, like, propaganda. Although, you know, that does exist. But it exists in every government, right? Even the United States. Family bonds are a little bit tighter here. You know, like in America, it's not uncommon for the child, the kid, to move out when they're 18. Whereas in China and a lot of Asian cultures, they live together until they're married. And sometimes they still live together afterwards. Like, just the whole family lives together. They eat together. Everything is, you know, one cohesive unit. When you marry someone, you marry their entire family, right? You're not just marrying the woman. Like, you're now a part of the family. And, you know, my wife's family has been very, very welcoming. And, you know, of course, there are differences in terms of like, expectations and food and languages and stuff. And, like, there's always going to be a little bit of friction there. But, you know, they've been very nice and, you know, nothing but positive. Working culture is also very different. There's more of a strict, direct hierarchy. You know, if you work in an American company, it's more relaxed, more casual, whereas in China, it's a little bit more strict and rigid. Like, this is your boss. You can only do what they say. Like, the boss is in charge in all aspects, can never be questioned. There can never be any, like, even feedback, you know, going up the ranks. Everything is just downwards. Discipline has been, like, at sometimes kind of ridiculous, where it's like, if you do something wrong in the company, you are publicly shamed, whereas in America, that's probably just straight up illegal. There also does seem to be more of a blending between your personal life and your work life. In America, there's a pretty strict, you know, separation between those two things, it seems. You know, if you don't go out with you know, your coworkers for drinks, like, no one really seems to give a shit. But in China, like, that is part of the work. Like, you going out with clients on Friday night or something, that is expected, and, like, you're expected to drink. And, you know, I know some foreigners here who, they were basically hired to drink with clients, right? Like, they were hired to, you know, go out and, like, to you know, go out with the clients, and that would never really happen in America. The concept of face is definitely much more of a thing. Like, in America, if like, someone gets embarrassed, it's not that big of a deal. Like, people move past it. Whereas in China, people remember that shit for a long time. And the only thing worse than losing face is causing someone else to lose face, what I've heard. And so they don't, you know, often people don't like confrontation here. They don't like conflict. And so, to the point where someone will, like, cut the line on the metro or in the bus line or something, and no one will say anything. In America, people will be like, "Hey, asshole, get to the fucking back of the line." Whereas in China, people will see it and they'll just be like they'll just, and I, like, to the point where, like, I don't give a fuck. If someone cuts the line, I'll be like, "Hey, like, get to the," like, I'll say in Chinese, like, "Get to the back of the line, like, we're all lined up here." And sometimes, like, people have never ever been called out on that, I can tell. Like, they're shocked that someone actually told them, "Hey, line up," and they've just gotten away with it for a really long time because no one actually calls out bad behavior in a lot of cases. Personal space is also definitely less of a thing, and I think if you're a foreigner in China, like, you kind of have to get used to that to some certain extent. Like, I don't accept people, like, really coming to my space unnecessarily, but they might not think that's actually all that big of a deal. I heard one study actually looked at conversations between a Westerner and I'm not sure if it was Asian or specifically Chinese, but they looked at them in time lapse during a conversation, and they would almost like waltz around the room in time lapse, because the American or the Westerner would say, okay, this person's a little bit too close, and they would step back a little bit, and then, you know, the Asian would be like, all right, well, why are they backing up? Like, it's normal to have a conversation very, very close together, and so they would, like, do this over the course of an entire conversation. There's also more of an emphasis on finances, to the point where, like, gift giving is kind of a big thing, and you have to know the value monetarily of the gift that you're giving. So if you give someone a gift, they will like try to find out how much it's worth and then give you a gift of like the approximate value. Whereas in America, like there's less of that and it doesn't seem to be as important. For example, during Chinese New Year, you just straight up give people money.
Because Chinese people love money. We love that shit. Chinese people fucking love money, okay? You think rappers love money? Yo, we love money. More than anyone. Chinese people love everything about it. We love making it, love spending it, we love giving it, we love receiving it, we love throwing.
It's called hongbao, red packet, and it's just a red envelope, literally filled with money that you just give to people, right? Like you're not even giving them a gift. You're just like, here's some money, and now it's just done on your phone through WeChat, and like you just send someone money during, and then like they send you money back. Like, well, what's the point of that? I guess it's just like the gift giving culture, which I don't completely understand, but like I'm kind of part of it now, right?
When we see each other during Chinese New Year, the way we greet each other is we say 恭喜发财 or 恭喜发财 in Cantonese. I'm sure you've heard that, at least peripherally, right? 恭喜发财, 恭喜发财. 恭喜发财 means hope you get rich.
Also, some topics are off limits in China, but completely fine in America or in the West. And then it's completely reversed as well. So I've had total strangers ask me about my salary. Whereas, you know, in the West, that's not really talked about as much. Whereas politics and sort of like religion and stuff, that's talked about in the West quite a bit, whereas here, it's not that much of a topic. For example, in China, if you gain weight, your friends, your family, your coworkers, they will just straight up tell you. They'd be like, you have gained weight. You are looking fat. Whereas in America, that's not really directly talked about, right? Like, it's kind of offensive to say some things. And almost every foreigner in China has to learn that people here aren't necessarily being rude just because they talk about things that would be considered rude, or talk about things in a certain way that would be considered rude in their country. So you kind of have to give people like the benefit of the doubt sometimes and realize they're not being a dick. It's just that that's your interpretation based on your socio-cultural upbringing. Another thing about work expectations, you're often expected, especially in the tech industry, to work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days per week. So, like when people talk about, you know, how many hours I put in, well, this is because often my wife doesn't get home until like 10 p.m. or 11 p.m., right? Like the boss will call a meeting on, you know, on a Friday evening. So most people would get off, you know, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Well, often in China, you know, I remember when I was working here in the tech industry, and it was like, you get off when the boss leaves, basically. So, you know, could be 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m., or even later. Like, I've been at the office until midnight or later, and all of the programmers were still there, every single one. And I was like, this is fucked up. And like the next day, they're there at 9 a.m. Like, did they sleep here? Some do. And then in terms of education, it is much, much higher of a priority here compared to the West. Like, way, way, way more. At University of Connecticut, where I went to university, I remember going to the library rarely, because I wasn't that serious of a student, and it would be all Asian people. Literally an entire floor, Asian, like completely Asian. And this is just like that work ethic and like the social pressure to do well, where it's just another level. Another social pressure is like getting married and having babies. Next level. Like I've never, like most Westerners don't have very much pressure from their parents to do those two things. Or at least it's like very little, or it's like they might inquire about it or be curious about it. Here, holy shit. Like if a woman is like 23, 24, they're probably going to get a lot of, you know, aunties and their mother and relatives like asking them incessantly when they're going to get married. And when they get married, like a few months later, it's like, kids? Because again, the family unit is much more connected, and the grandparents especially, it's almost like the kid, the grandchild is now like the focus of their life, and it's just a much more, there's just a lot more family pressure to do those things. So yeah, babies, money, language, food, point of view, work-life balance, everything. It's like, it's a lot of stuff is way different, but you know, people are people, and you know, I think a lot of people in the West misunderstand China because they're just told bad stuff, and like they say, oh, China has lots of propaganda, but then like they haven't really taken the time to understand how things really are here, and they're just literally told what to believe on mainstream media or the nightly news. And so they say, oh, they have propaganda. Like, oh, they have propaganda. They're brainwashed. These people are bad. But, you know, in reality, you know, I've had some really nice conversations here and have a lot of friends here. And, you know, there's more similarities than differences, even though there are a lot of differences. All right, that is all for this Q&A. I will try to get to the other answers in the community tab. I might not be able to answer all of them, especially if they're really open-ended, but if it's short and something I can just write out in a couple sentences, I will do my best to answer your questions. All right, like, subscribe, share, notifications, grab a copy of my book if you want to support the channel and you appreciate this advertisement-free content. All right, peace.